The Shroud of Turin is the most mysterious, most scrutinized, most controversial artifact in world history. And you want one video that explains everything, all the breaking news. This is that video. Welcome to the Can I Trust the Bible live stream. I'm Raj Nair, and on your screen, you will see my brother, Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, a genuine expert on this exact subject. My brother, how we doing?
I'm awesome, Raj. I'm ready to get into it. We've got breaking news about the Shroud of Turin. It is, I think, the most controversial artifactual evidence of the Christian faith, but it's not only famous in Christian circles. I mean, a lot of people don't realize during World War II, Hitler did everything he could to try to get the shroud in his possession. It was hidden, actually. So he even felt like it had power to it. So we're not the only people as followers of Jesus who are fascinated by the shroud.
Wow, that is a fascinating story. And we're going to get into all the breaking news. But first, and I think this is an absolutely crucial point to set the scene. What is the Shroud of Turin?
Yeah, the Gospels tell us that in all four Gospels, that Jesus, when he's crucified, he dies on the cross. The members of the Sanhedrin who condemned him to die, according to the Mishnah, were responsible for the crucified criminal's burial. What do we see in the Gospels? Two members of the Sanhedrin, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, request the body of Jesus from Pilate. They prepare his body for burial. He has to be buried soon. Remember, Pilate is shocked that Jesus was so quickly dead. That's the amount of trauma that he suffered. And then we see that the Gospels tell us that Jesus is prepared for burial and his body is wrapped in a linen sinden shroud. So a burial shroud is simply a burial cloth that the entire body is wrapped in Jewish burial traditions. It is not a mummy. Jesus was not embalmed. But if we look at it like this, Raj, just for the benefit of our audience who's watching, if this is a burial shroud and my iPhone is the body, you would place it in here, and then almost like a pita, the body would be wrapped, the head and the face and the back, and then we see the feet, and it would be placed horizontally into the burial tomb. And so that's what the shroud is. It is a linen burial cloth of Jesus, of a crucified criminal. We have hundreds of these from late antiquity, Jewish burial cloths made of linen. And what's interesting too is we can go back even further than the first century. We can go back 3,000 years before that, something that our audience can Google if they like, called the Tarkan dress. And you'll see that it is a linen shirt that is from 3000 BC. So having linen hang around for a few thousand years is not remarkable. What's remarkable about the Shroud of Turin, the burial shroud of Jesus, is that it left a distinctive image of a crucified man on the actual shroud linen.
Okay, let's get into that. And we're going to get into the breaking news, but can you talk more about, and I think this is why people want this video, is they want, hey, just explain all the details so I can make up my own mind. Talk about that image, talk about what they found in that image and why it starts to line up with the crucifixion story.
Absolutely. And to be very clear, the Shroud of Turin is a 14-foot in length burial shroud. We just showed that it would cover Jesus's body from head to toe and then back again. And the image, when I say the image, it's not just like a selfie. It's not just like his face. It is his whole body, front and back, of a crucified criminal. There is blood all over the shroud. So the first thing that you notice about the Shroud of Turin is there are pints and pints and pints of blood. The blood has been studied by hematologists, by chemists like Alan Adler. It's type AB blood. It is human blood. And there's been some fascinating new developments regarding the blood that we'll get into with the breaking news. Number two, it not only has this image, but it is a fascinating image because it has all of the credibility and authenticity of matching what we would expect of Jesus's bodily condition following crucifixion. There are several trauma wounds. In fact, there are 700 lacerations in the crucified man on the Shroud of Turin. Think about that for a minute. The flagrum, the Roman flagrum, that's Latin, the whip that was used for crucified criminals had three cords and had barbell type lead ends. And so when a crucified victim endured flagellation, we can estimate that the crucified Roman criminal of the Shroud of Turin endured somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 lashes. Think about how tired your arm would get whipping someone as hard as you can 120 times. Keep in mind, in Jewish law, you could only lash someone 40 stripes. So often you would say 40 minus one just to make sure you didn't go over 40. The Romans had no such law. And so you see blood. But then what's fascinating, and here's the implications if this is true, Raj, for the audience. If this is true, we have an image of the moment of Jesus's resurrection. My area
Wow.
of specialty is the resurrection of Jesus. I did my PhD on it in the UK. So the Gospels give us two important strands of details with regard to the resurrection. They give us what's called empty tomb tradition, and then they give us appearance tradition. All four Gospels, none of them even attempt to describe the moment of resurrection. However, if the shroud is true, I want to make sure people understand it has blood. The blood comes first. That's the dead guy. And then next comes this bolt of light, this energy, this electromagnetic energy that emanates from every aspect of the body that produces this image. It sounds too good to be true. It sounds crazy until you start actually looking at what over 50 scientists cross-disciplinary have done. No science, no scientist today, Raj, can explain. And this is what got my attention as someone who's like you and your audience. I'm passionate for truth. I'm a truth addict. I don't allow social media to educate me. I learn from everyone, but no one thinks for me. When I started reading the scientific reports about the shroud, that's what turned me from a shroud skeptic to a, well, I'm going to look into this more, to now I believe with all my heart that the image is the image of Jesus. I think it's a slam dunk that the Shroud of Turin is really the shroud of Jesus.
Wow, that is incredible. Now let's get into the breaking news. Now, personally, you'd be walking into church in Italy or Spain or Poland, and they're like, "This is a little piece of the cross." And I've always been
Right.
that skeptic. I've always been like, "Come on,
Yeah,
come on!" Like, I know you built your church around this little, wood chip, but let's be honest, like the chances of that wood chip being part of the cross, I've always approached things like this with a healthy dose of skepticism. And it's the same thing with the Shroud of Turin, where I'm like, okay, this is compelling evidence, but. However, this breaking news has shattered my skepticism. We're
right.
to the point where I'm like, okay, my goodness, could this actually be the face of Yeshua of Nazareth? Not some guy,
Right.
the person who reached down from heaven, grabbed me, you, from the muck, and said, I am going to, they don't know what they're doing. I'm going to, if this is actually his face, his body, like this would be the greatest discovery. I mean, right up there with the Dead Sea Scrolls of all time. So here's the
Absolutely.
question. What is the breaking news?
The breaking news, and again, I go to the primary sources. The breaking news is that in the Heritage Science Journal, an article appeared called X-ray Dating of a Turin Shroud's Linen Sample. Now, for the benefit of our audience, the reason that many people have thought that the Shroud of Turin is a hoax, that it's an elaborate hoax, that it's a fake, is because in 1988, three different labs did radiocarbon dating of the Shroud of Turin, and they all announced that the Shroud of Turin was only 700 years old. In other words, Raj, this was a medieval forgery. It was on the front of all the newspapers. This was a medieval forgery. Now, what's happened since then is I have the other reports, like such as on radiocarbon dating of the Shroud of Turin in another scientific journal. It has been shown after 25 years of the raw data being suppressed by the British Museum, I might add, meaning they would not allow anyone to actually look at the raw data of how they did the radiocarbon dating. And we don't need to waste time in this broadcast, but for the benefit of our audience, you can look at the latest and greatest studies, and all the scientists agree that the radiocarbon dating is not a reason to believe that the shroud is a hoax, because the radiocarbon dating is is erroneous in and of itself. It's erroneous because they actually took patches of the shroud from the Middle Ages. We know that the shroud was patched in the 16th century when it survived a fire in 1532. We know that it's been doused before. We know that some, as you say, indulgences were sold. If you gave a big enough gift to the church, they might send you a piece of the shroud. So it has been patched. And that's what the radiocarbon dating. All carbon is, smoke is carbon. And so if the shroud survives a fire 700 years ago, the radiocarbon dating is going to say, well, there's carbon on here that's 700 years old. So that's why people discounted it. So enter this brand new study back to the Heritage Journal. This is the Waxis dating wide angle X-ray scattering of the fibers of the shroud. Show that the shroud fibers, okay, the actual herringbone fiber, there's a herringbone weave, okay, so the fibers that made up the herringbone weave, these fibers have indeed been deteriorating not for 700 years but for 2000 years, because they have the same deterioration of another shroud linen from Masada before the destruction of Masada in Jerusalem in AD 66 to 70. So what are we going to do with that when a lab, the Institute of Crystallography, not a bunch of theologians, these are scientists, do X-ray scattering imaging that is verifiable with another, where there's no question, shroud from Masada? And that's been the breaking news. The breaking news is we already knew that the radiocarbon dating, if you look at my old videos a couple of years ago, we knew the radiocarbon dating was erroneous, but we hadn't had a scientific team do new studies. And it's like, well, we'll wait and see. Well, this X-ray scattering is massive. It's one of the two huge breaking news items that the fibers, and you can go download this for free yourself. I would encourage our audience to do that. These are scientists, not Bible scholars who want the shroud to be true. They're scientists who say, hey, compared with fibers from that region of the first century, the shroud has been essentially has been degrading for 2,000 years, if that makes sense. It's huge. It's majorly breaking news.
That is so amazing. Sorry.
What we're going to do, and we're not getting in some kind of religious trance here. I've got enough to do today. I don't have to do a video on the shroud if I think this thing is a joke. What's fascinating to me as a scholar is when you look at all of the lines of evidence, the burden of proof is on the skeptic to show how in the world could this be a hoax. And then if it's not a hoax, if you agree, like the 50 scientists in 1978 who studied the shroud, who said there is no pigment, there's no paint, there's no dye, the image is in fact superficial, Raj. Let me explain that because this is important, okay? I already mentioned there's blood all over the shroud. And when you get your microscope up to the shroud, you see that the blood seeps through the herringbone weave of the shroud, okay? It goes all the way through the fibers, the thread, linen, the weave. You think about this shroud, okay? And it's weaved together, and we know it was an expensive shroud bought by a wealthy man because not all shrouds have a herringbone weave. In our old house in Houston, my wife wanted to do a herringbone backsplash. It's the only reason I knew what herringbone was. I just knew it costs a lot of money. Well, that's the weave of the man of the shroud. Now, here's what's interesting. I just said that the blood seeps all the way through, but the image of the shroud of the crucified man is superficial, meaning that of a single thread, which has a smaller diameter, let me use my hair as an example, Raj, if you don't mind, than the hairs on my head.
I've been bald since 2010, man.
Okay,
not hurting my feelings.
I love
not
you.
Hurting my feelings.
But I'm using this. The threads are smaller than the diameter of my hair on the shroud, and they're made up of small fibers. The fibers, when they're looked at under the microscope, show that only one or two of those fibers have the actual image on it. How in the world would you do that if you were making a hoax? That's my question. Let's say it's not true. How do you do? This is what scientists are saying. Okay, the image is there. It's like a sepia color, but it's only there a little bit. It disappears if you walk, because it's only just a few fibers thick. It's not like the blood that goes all the way through. So again, what are you going to do with that?
Wow. So here's the thing. It's to this day in 2024, we couldn't fake it now. So how could someone
£1 million, if someone wants a quick £1 million right now, there's a British businessman who's offered £1 million to anyone who can reproduce the shroud and as a fake.
Okay, so here's the thing. It has all the markings of the crucifixion of Jesus. It's not fakeable. And the breaking news is that now we can say this thing is 2,000 years old. So it seems like the evidence is just
Well,
mounting up. So here's the question.
we haven't even scratched the surface. There's pollen on it that one scientist spent 5 years of his life. This is why you have to, as a careful Christian thinker, and why I love your show, Raj. We have to think for ourselves. We can't just get a book and think, oh, well, this scholar discounted it, so therefore it must all be a ruse. No, you can go read the report of a scientist who spent 5 years of his life going around the world collecting pollen spores to show that the pollen spores. I mean, by the way, I've had to become an expert in things I never knew I'd have to be an expert in. I didn't know I was going to be looking at pollen spores. But the same way we test for mold, pollen, and all that in our home, he's looking at pollen spores. They're Semitic. They're only from the land of Israel. The same pollen spores that are on Israel are on the shroud. So again, if we're creating a middle age forgery, we wouldn't have known that we needed pollen from Israel. We wouldn't even known you could test for something like that. So there's pollen. The blood is type AB. It's Semitic. That's from Alan Adler, the chemist.
Oof.
It's the most. There only 3% of the world's population have type AB blood. If there's ever a royal bloodline, I'll just throw that in there and let it sit. We know that the image on the shroud. You say, okay, Jeremy, JJ, it's a. I'll grant you it's not a hoax. Okay, it's impossible that this is a hoax, but like, how do you know it's Jesus, man? I mean, that could have just been anyone who was crucified. Well, this is where I do put my I know a lot about a little hat on, and I know a lot about execution, Roman style. And no one, Raj, was crucified the way Jesus was crucified. The Romans took it to a demonic level the way Jesus was crucified. We have no other evidence of a Roman criminal having a crown or what I would call a helmet of thorns put on their head.
Mm.
And what do we see in the crucified man of the shroud? He has abrasions, protrusions, penetrations all over his scalp. Not just, don't think like a sweatband, like you're playing basketball, think helmet of thorns pressed. Here's another one. Tell me if this is familiar. The man of the shroud, and I have the image here pointing out all of the different wounds, or not all, many of them. Why is there, okay, I'm looking on here, there is a 3-inch wide lance spear wound in the side of the criminal going up towards his heart. Does that ring a bell? Was someone we know stabbed in the heart? Yep, that's Jesus, and no evidence of broken legs. Remember, Pilate normally, Raj, again, because people just don't. There's so much historical distance. I'm sorry, I get excited about this, but
No.
they normally, if I wanted to crucify you, Raj, I would plan on might take you like 2 or 3 days to die. And do you remember Pilate is surprised that Jesus was so soon dead? We know that Jesus couldn't carry his cross. The shroud on Jesus endures at least 120 lashes in the flagellation. And then he's asked to carry the patibulum, the crossbeam. He can't carry it. He drops it. Well, what do we have on the man of the shroud? Extra injury on his shoulders. Can you imagine your back being lacerated 120 times, and then you have to stick a splinter-filled patibulum crossbeam on a cross that's probably got all kinds of crud in it from other crucifixion victims, and you've got to carry that? Well, we see those abrasions in the shoulder of the man of the shroud. So I could go on, but
No, and please do. And this is, oh my gosh, the idea that he, by his wounds, we have been healed, and to think that there's a piece of cloth where we can see those wounds. That, oh my gosh. So I guess the question is, why is this so controversial? And what is there any compelling arguments against it?
okay, if I was in your home right now and we stacked up all the evidence that we have for the shroud being authentic, okay? And again, just following the science. You don't have to even bring faith into this. Just following the science. If we add up the evidence, the evidence would go to the ceiling for all of the things we're discussing and we have yet to discuss. And then if we wanted to have a different table, the evidence for why we discount it, we would put one thing on there, the 1988 radiocarbon dating.
Wow.
That is the only reason.
Wow.
Literally, it is the only reason that even some evangelical scholars, I'm not going to name them out on your show, but they've had to actually adjust some of their books, their best sellers, kind of OG Christian books about the shroud. Oh, we shouldn't put any faith in this. And I want to blow some stereotypes apart for our audience. I'm very happy that I grew up in the evangelical world. but I grew up with a real allergic reaction to relics.
Hmm.
And as you mentioned, um, and so the shroud smacked of that to me. Like, is this some kind of weird relic that, I've been all over the world. I mean, the three wise men are in the cathedral in Cologne, Germany. I've seen it all in Israel, blah, 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 how they monetize it. Well, here's what I, in my own research, realized: the shroud did not come under the control of the Catholic Church until 1988, after I was born. So the shroud has been in private hands for most of its 2,000-year history.
Wow.
Only in the late 80s did it come under not really even control of the church. It was left to the Pope himself. So the Pope can decide when the shroud is visible. Right now, if you go to Turin, Italy, which is in the northern Piedmont district of Italy, if you go to St. John's Cathedral, the church there, St. John's, you're going to see a shroud, but it's not the real shroud. The real shroud, it's a facsimile. The real shroud has not been on display since 2015, and I can announce to your show that it's going back on display in 2025. And
Wow.
again, you'll see that hundreds of thousands of people line up to see it.
Okay, so on these live streams, we really want to get you involved, and so we look at the comments. We genuinely do, and I want to
Yeah.
actually read a question. Well, kind of three questions, but it's one from our last live stream we did on Wednesday. So again, if you aren't already, please do subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're going to bring people just like my brother here on to address these pressing questions. And actually, on our last live stream, we had a lot of questions about the Shroud of Turin. So again, please comment in
Good.
this question in this video, and we'll bring you back on to answer those questions. But here's the question. Okay, so this is a direct quote from one of the comments. And it's let's say, my goodness, let's say this is an image of Yeshua of Nazareth, Jesus of Nazareth. Should we get copies of this picture? Should every church place this picture on their altar? Should we worship and bow down to this picture now that we know it is truly God Himself, the Word made flesh?
Yeah, we should buy it. We should worship it. No, no, you shouldn't do any of that. Why would you do that? Like, we don't need that. The temple is in our hearts from
Come on.
Jesus. No, not at all. And I think this is a very good question, and I applaud the person who's asked, and thank you for all your interaction. The second commandment says that, a lot of people have asked, is the shroud, could we be guilty of worshiping a graven image and violating the second commandment? My partner Micah here asked me that too, and that's a great question. And my answer, and I've done a lot of thinking about this, because I know how most Christians are not going to do the study that you and I have done, Raj. They're going to take the sound bites and then they're going to get really excited and just move on with their lives. But they might want to, like, buy the shroud and look at it every day, or kneel in front of it and pray. Hey, anything that brings you closer to Jesus is helpful, but the shroud is not man-made. And so we're
Mhm.
not worshiping a man-made image. The shroud is a miracle. And it just simply, we need to do what the disciples did. It wasn't until in John chapter 20, when the disciples see the linen cloths laying in the tomb, they run out and they want to tell people about Jesus. So that's, for me, the application is, I see the linen cloth. It's awesome. I think it's slam dunk. This is an image of Jesus at the moment of resurrection. I want to make that clear. And it happened in 1/40th of a second, like a laser beam, 2.5 trillion watts, more than all the energy we have on Earth. It happened in a split of a second. And you think about the transfiguration. I mean, this was a bolt of lightning, like a picture, like a selfie. Boom, this is me in my resurrection. And the
What? Wait,
disciples
say
want to
that
go,
that 2 trillion thing again. What was
yeah,
that about?
I want to share this. So the event happened in 1/40th of a billionth of a second, like a laser beam. 2.5, excuse me, billion watts of energy is the estimated power it took to generate this superficial image on the shroud.
Whoa, whoa.
So it
Okay,
happened in a moment, because if it took any longer than that, it would have just burned the shroud up. Like, it was
okay. So
radiation.
one of the other skeptical ideas that people have been throwing around is in John 20, when it says that Peter, he bent over and looked at the strips
Yeah.
of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen
Hmm.
lying there, as well as the cloth that had been placed around and wrapped around Jesus's head. So people will say, well, in John 20, it talks about strips of linen, a cloth on his head, not some shroud. How would you respond to that?
Athonia in Greek can be plural and singular. That's the word strips, athonia. And it's of uncertain total meaning, but we know that the Gospels use it in the singular and the plural in the Greek New Testament. So it could refer to one piece of the grave clothes or all of the grave clothes. So again, this is where we can't read the Bible in like a wooden way when we see that in the Greek New Testament it's used in the singular and in the plural. And I think what John is doing there is he's referring to all the burial garments of Jesus. For example, in John 20, it also said that the main burial cloth was folded together, and then the face cloth was thrown in the side essentially of the tomb. Well, people are like, well, okay, well, if you have a face napkin, how do you leave an image on the shroud of the face? Well, it wasn't like a face napkin, like covering his face like this. This was actually like a jaw cap to make sure Jesus's body, and I mean, this was just typical Jewish burial traditions. When it was before it set into rigor mortis, you didn't want the mouth wide open because that was undignified in death. And so they would tie the mouth closed with this jaw band that goes under the jaw and then ties on top. And we can actually see that because the beard seems to be pressed back in one spot on the image of the shroud, etc. And so it was just to keep the mouth closed. And so that's what that is in the side of the grave.
This is gonna be so nerdy, but that actually, I think you can make that have like a lot of sense if you've ever seen A Christmas Story, A Christmas Carol, where it's like Ebenezer Scrooge's friend Jacob Marley had that thing around his
exactly.
Exactly. I've never actually
that's exactly right. And so Jesus would have had this, so that, and then they would have had some kind of strip too, just in Jewish burial tradition, horizontally, just a couple places over. And I think you even see that on the shroud. There's like this line in the image towards the under the chin. That might have even been a strip, just kind of keeping your arms together so you didn't like fall off. So
okay. So we're obviously going to have you back again and again and again. Please do put your comments. I promise you, we will read them. Questions for my brother here, and again, subscribe, because we're going to do a lot more live streams because there's just so much archaeology and the Shroud of Turin. There's a lot happening right now, and it's kind of prophetic feeling. So make sure you are subscribed to this YouTube channel. So we're going to have you back, but I want to ask this question: if this is the burial shroud of the Savior of the world, the Word that became flesh, not academically, not logistically, not scientifically, spiritually, what does this mean? What does this shroud, what message does this piece of cloth have to give my friend here who is watching?
Romans 5:8 says, but God demonstrated his love to us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And when I look at the shroud, first I see the ugliness of my sin. It took a body. It took a blood. It took a sacrifice to atone for my sin. My sin is ugly. My sin is stinky. My sin is gross. My sin separates me from God. And when I look at the shroud and I want to think about the fact that all the things I try to do to please God, it's already been done. Everything that could be done for my salvation was completed 2,000 years ago on the cross. And those 700 wounds that the crucified man, the shroud of Jesus, shows that Jesus endured, shows me how much God demonstrated his love for me. And it wasn't because I was lovely, it was because I was so in need of a Savior. And so when I push away from the table, I think to myself, thank you, Lord. First, forgive me, Lord, for when I doubt your love for me. I doubt your love for me way too much. When I look at the shroud, it reminds me of how much, I need God, but how the extent that Jesus was willing to go to save me, and he went to the full extent.
That was said perfectly. My brother, Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, thank you so very much. We're going to have you back, but that was educational and inspiring. You're one of one, my friend.
Well, you're the best. Thanks for having me. I look forward to do it again.
Hey, I'm Raj Nair. Thank you for watching the Can I Trust the Bible YouTube channel. We hope this video gave you compelling evidence to trust in the validity of the Bible. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And ask your questions in the comments and share the video with your friends and skeptics. Thanks for watching. See you next time.